Welcome to Anchor TV Weekly. I'm Raymond Baccari. As mentioned in last week's newscast, this is a special episode. Today we're hosting a one-hour debate for the Rhode Island State Senate District 1 special election. I will be moderating this debate with my good friend Ryan Lukowicz, who is the host of the Behind the Candidates podcast. The candidates in this debate and on the ballot are Democrat Jake Basilian, who is the Senate President's Chief of Staff in Rhode Island, and Republican Nayoka Powell, who is the Rhode Island GOP's second vice chair. Now, candidates, we aren't going to impose a specific time limit for your answers. However, Ryan and I will try to keep this conversation as flowing and moving to cover as much ground as possible. So we ask that you don't talk over each other or interrupt each other, because Ryan and I will interject. And same goes for if you're taking too long to answer or not answering directly, just again to keep the conversation flowing and covering as much ground as possible. You both will have time for a 1-minute closing statement at the end of the debate, and as always, there will be a lightning round portion in the middle. I will start things off with our first topic, which is recent news regarding the race. So, Ms. Powell, on Friday, you sent out a press release saying that a white female senior Democrat who held a prominent position in the state Senate for years before becoming a media personality sent you an email that, quote, exposes the Democrat Party's culture of cronyism and racial caricature. We're bringing this up because this was sent out obviously before the election, but also since it's both redacted and Ryan and I can't really figure out who that biography describes as for the sender of this email. So just starting off, who sent the email?
Well, I think it's besides the point who sent the email. It's just the fact that the email was sent to begin with. When it comes to politics in Rhode Island, it has always been a way of deterring people from running, deterring people from speaking out against the norm. And I think that the fact that I was reached out to in the second attempt for the seat meant that there was really going to be a challenge there, that I was supposed to just bow out gracefully and just take it like it is, or switch sides, and I wasn't going to do either. And
just to kind of pry into it just a little bit more, so you're not going to at all say who sent this email? Because, I mean, when this was sent out on Twitter, there was a bit of skepticism regarding the sender, and we're going to tie Mr. Basilian in a second, but just want to clarify, just give me one more chance. You're going to disclose who the sender was?
Not at this moment, no.
Okay, so now tying you in, Mr. Basilian, you had replied on Twitter when I tweeted out this press release, highlighting the misspelling of Senate President Dominic Ruggiero's name in the email. And for those watching and or listening, there was a line where the sender says that they've known Dominic forever, referring to the Senate President. So it kind of sounds like you cast a doubt on the I guess, validity of this sender. So do you think the email was fake?
I don't think the email was fake. And first, I want to start by just denouncing that email, that sort of campaigning. I won the Democratic primary with over 50% of the vote. It was a four-way race. I had a cordial relationship with all the individuals running in the Democratic primary. I certainly welcomed a robust debate during that process. And at the end of the day, I think the values and the viewpoints that I espoused during that process carried a lot of weight with the voters, hence why I got over 50% of the vote in a four-way race. I merely put that out there because I think it's indicative of the fact that whoever sent it really doesn't have the relationship that is being characterized with the Senate President. I mean, to not even be able to spell his first name right seems pretty inauthentic. But I do think the email is real, and I certainly think anyone who wants to run for office should be afforded that opportunity. We live in a democracy. It thrives best when there's a lot of different viewpoints, and I think over the next hour we're going to see that my opponent and I have a lot of different viewpoints.
And before we move on, so the email, I'm assuming 100% authentic? Just
100% authentic.
Okay, and any response to him pointing out the misspelling of the Senate President's name? Because if they did know him for years, I mean, you think they'd spell the name right.
Well, I can't attest to the person who wrote the email because they're the ones who sent it to me, so I'm not really a judge on their ability to spell names.
Well, I mean, I would just say that Rhode Island's a small state, so if they shared who could send the email, we'd be able to cut right to the chase.
Ms. Powell, if I could just ask you a follow-up question on this. This person, you're keeping it anonymous. We understand what the email said, but how can you connect this to Mr. Basilian and try to make it relevant for this election?
Well, it was the fact that he would have a lot of financial support behind him, which was pretty much what was said, was that, there's going to be a lot of dollars being thrown into this race, and it would just make sense for me to either switch sides or just, back down.
How do you respond to that?
If I could, I'd just like to address that question out of the gate. I have lived in Rhode Island for the last 18 years. I've been privileged enough to hold a lot of high government positions in senior administrations. I've done a lot with those positions, I believe, to move our state forward. And out of the gate, I was very cognizant of the fact that money would play a factor in this race. And so from the very first day of announcing my campaign, I said I wouldn't take money from registered lobbyists. I haven't taken money from folks that work for me up at the State House. I've made very clear lines and tried to go above and beyond the ethical responsibilities of running to not be influenced by money.
Just one last thing before we litigate this topic any further, because Ryan and I were playing a little bit of Guess Who, trying to figure out who it was Friday when that press release was sent out. Yeah. So to clarify, they were a state senator, correct?
They were.
Okay,
yes.
State senator and then a media personality?
And then a media personality.
Got it. Okay, so for those at home, if you want to find out who it is, try to look up the biography for that. So now moving on to another development in this race, which was a little bit earlier than that email. There was also some dialogue about Senate President Ruggiero picking a new chief of staff before this election's results. And for those watching and or listening again, Mr. Basilian is the current chief of staff to Senate President Ruggiero. Ms. Powell had called Ruggiero's announcement, quote, the outrageous entitlement typical of the Democrat machine that dominates Rhode Island politics, and also claimed the Democrat establishment believes they own the seat. So Mr. Basilian, your response to those kind of claims?
Yeah, I mean, I would think that it shows that he's a forward-thinking leader who wants to ensure a smooth transition in the event that I win. All of that was framed in that context. In the event that I win the seat, then John Fleming would be the next chief of staff for the Senate. I think, first of all, that's well within the Senate president's right to do. We have institutions in this state in order to ensure continuity of operations. It makes sense that he would make that announcement. It was made alongside, too, I believe, naming a new Senate Majority Whip in Val Lawson, who she has big shoes to fill, but I'm confident that Val will be able to do that. Nothing is preordained. Nothing was preordained when I discussed running for the seat with the Senate President. I think I did it with some certainly professional risk as well. At the end of the day, I will have to find new employment if I'm successful in a couple of weeks, 2 weeks from tomorrow. And I didn't expect anything to get handed to me. I ran against a sitting state representative. I ran against someone who had run for the Senate before. And I ran against a very brilliant young woman who works for the Latino Policy Institute who offered a host of vibrant ideas during this campaign. We had full-throated debates on all of them. I knocked over 2,000 doors. And at the end of the day, I got over 54% of the vote. I think that's a good accomplishment that speaks volumes to the work ethic that I put into winning that primary. I didn't expect anything to be handed to me.
Ms. Powell?
Well, I think that it's a matter of knowing who to go to, because I too put in the legwork. I too went to all the doors, and primarily some of the individuals that I spoke with had said, oh, so-and-so came to my door, we're going to go with him because he knows so-and-so. And it's obviously just an example of how people are in the district. They will choose, obviously, who they vote for, but it's also the dynamic of the knowing of the name dropping and everything else when it comes to campaigning that, besides the policies that are actually available or policies that need to be worked on, people are just still looking to name recognition as opposed to what is available to the other candidates.
I find the accusation that people knew my name out of the gate in the Democratic primary.
I didn't say it was your name.
Well, I mean, that's what you insinuated. And a lot of legwork went into getting myself out there as a candidate. Nobody knew who I was, except for maybe some insiders because of my current role. But my neighbors, they barely had met me. The folks that lived on the North End. And at the end of the day, I invested a lot of time in having one-on-one conversations at people's doorstep, people I knew were engaged in the sense that they were most likely to turn out in a Democratic primary. And I made sure to build very authentic, lasting relationships with those people. I'm counting on their support again in 2 weeks. I want to remind everyone, which is one of the reasons I think it's important that we have forums like this, and I want to thank Anchor TV, Ryan and Ray for hosting this, because the election isn't over. We have an election 2 weeks from tomorrow as well, and it's important that people get out and they make their voice heard. But the idea that it's a know a guy culture and people happen to know me or that sort of thing, that's just outrageous.
Ms. Powell, last word, and then we're going to move on to the next topic.
The know a guy culture is definitely not about you. It's about you knowing who you know and how they go about getting those votes. But again, I am learning. This is a field that is not my forte. I'm a nurse by trade, and I jumped into this race because I know the community needs someone who's actually going to look out for them and not necessarily look out for the name recognitions.
Okay, so I think we've talked about the recent developments in this race enough. Now we're going to move on to the next topic, which Ryan will take over, which is the budget / state's fiscal situation. Ryan?
Thank you, Raymond. Yes, we are going to discuss the budget. Last year, Rhode Island passed a historic budget, and it was one of the largest, I believe, in state's history, coming in at about $14 billion. It's important to note that all Senate Republicans, led by Minority Leader Jessica De La Cruz, voted against the budget based on its size, with concerns that the state would be spending too much. So, Mr. Basilian, we'll start with you on this one. Do you think that budget was too large, and would you vote for a budget regardless of the size in the coming years when you do become a state senator and can vote on the budget?
Well, I think that's all largely dependent on what's inside that budget when we talk about votes in the coming years. If we take a step back and we look at the budget that was just approved with overwhelming support, it is historic in its investments. It's historic in its investments in housing, investments in education. There's more state education aid for our local schools in that budget than ever before. Same with investments in housing. Everywhere you go in the district, you hear about a housing affordability crisis. And so that budget made historic investments. Now, one of the reasons that it was able to make such historic investments is because we had a substantial amount of federal funds in the wake of the COVID pandemic. And the goal of those funds is to ensure that Rhode Island and Rhode Islanders can emerge as successfully as possible from that pandemic by making targeted investments to help ensure that recovery. So when we talk about those targeted investments, we're talking about housing, providing for housing insecurity, food insecurity, SNAP benefits, that sort of thing. So that inflated size, if you will, is because of the large amount of federal funds we received. And I can say undoubtedly that the budgets that will be before the state legislature over the next coming years will be smaller.
So just to follow up to that, of course, I think that's a reasonable assumption. You're right, because of the federal funds. But where do the cuts come in, and what do you think needs to be going away in these next several years? Because I think everyone, or at least most people, can agree on the good investments.
Right.
But something has to go, right?
Well, I think that's important to note, and I think that's a good follow-up. I think some of that will happen by natural attrition. A lot of the investments were made were one-time investments. So when we talk about deferred maintenance in our state properties over years, we increased our DCAM budget, which is Division of Capital Asset Management. We invested a substantial amount of funds at the University of Rhode Island College. Those are all one-time investments. And from the outset, I got to hand it to the Senate President, the Speaker of the House, the Governor. They said, and it's one of the best practices, quite frankly, of government budgeting, something I learned very early on when I was a policy analyst at Rhode Island Public Expenditure Council. Whenever you have one-time money, you want to make sure that most of it goes towards one-time expenditures. So we talk about building more affordable housing, investing in our parks, playgrounds, public spaces, public schools. One of the things that does scare me, quite frankly, is we have expanded some of the social programs that people come to rely on, especially coming out of a pandemic. And we've also seen COVID dollars go towards trying to deal with our workforce crises, whether it's one-time bonuses for child care providers, that sort of thing. So I think ultimately, the attrition because of the one-time investments, that will go away. The thing that scares me most is the programs that we've expanded, though, and I do think a lot of those workforce bonuses that people have come to rely on, something we're going to have to manage through.
We're going to get Ms. Powell in on this.
Ms. Powell, same question. I'm assuming you're pretty concerned a little bit more about that $14 billion price tag and what will have to happen next year.
Yeah, that's a hefty price tag, especially because this year alone, Providence has increased taxes on homeowners, and it just didn't make any sense if we had a surplus to begin with. So the surplus that we had this past year would have pretty much been able to go back to the people after, increasing taxes on them, but we don't see that. We see that being reinvested back into the state to fund programs that are one-time. Now, when it comes to those one-time programs of funding, such as like the housing and all that, it's pretty much going back into what we've done before, which is we're not taking care of the properties and they're going to fall apart and we're going to increase taxes again. And that's usually what's happened. And so that's why we need to rebuild our schools now. We have to go back into the public housing developments and redo what is there. We need to maintain programs. We need to maintain the properties that we already have here in the state, and we're doing a very awful job at doing that. And so the solution to it seems to be increase more taxes on people and just keep taxing and getting a bigger budget every single year. So if we can figure out a way to maintain our properties and maintain a cost of living that's affordable to people without overtaxing them and reinvesting in the community itself and the people who live there, I think we would have a smaller budget.
So,
If I may, sorry.
yes, go ahead.
So when we talk about investing in communities, first of all, I think it's important to note that state aid to Providence is at the highest level it's ever been. Whether you talk about distressed communities relief or also investing in our public schools. There's a reason why we see historic investments going into our public schools here in Providence. Over a dozen public schools are getting rebuilt over the next 10 years, and that is state aid that is coming from the state of Rhode Island and being invested in our local city. That said, too, when you talk about deteriorating public housing, deteriorating public schools, that is where those federal funds are going. So I believe that's a gross mischaracterization of the state budget. And lastly, raising taxes. We cut the tangible tax at the state level on 80% of businesses. We eliminated it. So the idea that taxes have been going up, too, is just a mischaracterization, which is controlled by the city of Providence. So I think when you talk about the role of a state senator, one of the things that we have to uniquely understand is we're talking about the state budget here, not the city budget.
Okay, but we're also in a city. We are focusing on the city as a whole in District 1. That does...
Correct. And the state legislature has done everything it can over the last couple of years to increase state aid to the city of Providence and mitigate the need for tax increases at the local level.
So, Ms. Powell, for tax, do you support any tax cuts at the state level, and how would you justify this if the budget has to be reduced next year because of those federal funds going away?
I think that the investments that we do within the colleges should be cut because every year there's a question for URI, getting more funds for more building. I think at this point, especially in District 1, if I'm to focus on District 1, the budget itself should focus more on that grade school level as opposed to the advanced levels of education. I understand that that's where most of the finances come into the state is through our education system at a higher education, but we are dropping the ball on the younger children in the state.
We will talk a lot more about education.
If I may, I
want
need
you
to follow
respond
up on that when we
Yes.
talk about elementary schools, schools at the grade level, K through 12 education here in the city of Providence, specifically in Senate District 1. We just had an amazing ribbon cutting up at the Narducci Family Learning Center, which will stand as a swing school. And what we mean when we talk about when we mean swing school is so many of our schools in the city of Providence are going to be redone over the next decade that we need a place to send those kids for 2 to 3 years while their school is being redone. Harry Kazarian is getting redone, Nathaniel Green is getting redone, and Narducci just got redone. That's 3 schools in Senate District 1 that have either been redone or are going to get redone, largely because of the state investment and the state reimbursement at the school construction level. So I think to just sit here and conflate and pit higher education against grade level education as it relates to Senate District 1 is not grounded in reality. The investments that we've made at URI over the last couple of years at Rhode Island College are merely a drop in the bucket when we talk about deferred maintenance and increasing investments in higher education. We need to do more of that, just like we need to do more of reinvesting at the K through 12 level. But to sit here and act like nothing is getting done in Senate District 1 is, I mean, that's just detached from reality.
Ms. Powell, we have to move on, but Toysha...
Briefly, last word.
Okay.
Yeah, so
20 seconds.
I'm speaking in regards to the actual programs themselves, not the buildings. I think that's also an investment that people forget about. It's not just about the cosmetics of building the schools. It's also about the programs that are within those schools.
But you started your statement by talking about crumbling infrastructure.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Brazilian. We're gonna put a pin in this topic and move on to elections. So there's a lot of electoral reforms that could be on the map and or voted on in the next session. If whoever wins this race ends up being a state senator, they would be one of those votes. So I'm gonna start off broad and then we'll hone in on specifics. I'll start with you, Mr. Brazilian. As a state senator, what kind of electoral reforms would you support?
Certainly anything that increases access to the ballot, anything that increases or makes it easier for folks to register to vote. A number of years ago, we switched over to opt-out voter registration at the DMV, so therefore when you would go to apply for your license, you would automatically be registered to vote, something that was opposed by Republicans at the time in the state legislature. The other thing that I would like to see is some sort of model for primary and general primary reform that ensures that the folks that win the general election win with the majority of the vote, not just a plurality. Whether you talk about statewide office holders or also at our local legislative level. I think it's critical that the people that we vote into office have some sort of mandate for governing. And to me, that's shifting from a plurality-based model to a majority-based model.
Ms. Powell, any electoral reforms on your mind as if you get elected?
I think that voting should be one day and should be a statewide holiday so people can get to the ballots. I think that if we allow people the time to get to the ballots, they will go. And when it comes to, reasons as to why people can't get to the ballots, it's usually because of work. So, making sure that voting is a holiday. I mean, we can always give a holiday to something, so we might as well just give it to the actual important day of democracy, which is your ability to vote on November 7th or whenever the election is.
I certainly would support making Election Day a state holiday. But the other thing I would say is to limit voting and someone's access to the ballot to just one day is not grounded in reality. You have students that go to a different state but still reside in the district, plan on living in the district for the rest of their life. Should they not be allowed to vote and exercise their democratic voice? Other people's work-life balance doesn't even allow for them to go on a holiday if they, depending on their scheduling. And is it going to be a 24-hour holiday? Polls going to be open 24 hours? I mean, what if they have a shift that precludes them from getting there? So I think you have to allow for some sort of early voting option, and I think you have to allow for some sort of mail vote option too. To just limit it to one day is, we're talking about democracy here, and as we see things unfold throughout the world, tragic conflicts as it relates to tyranny versus democracy, I think ensuring the most robust democracy that we can is critical.
Ms. Powell, any response?
I think that leaves room for a lot of different things that we don't want to talk about, which is voter fraud and everything else. So I think that if we have it in a more constricted time frame, then people would be able to vote and cast their votes. It's that important.
Anything you want to add to that before we start honing in on some specifics?
I would just say that we had a very competitive primary in Senate District 1. I mean, I didn't hear of any allegations of voter fraud or anything like that.
Speaking of primaries, one of those reforms that I want to talk about to get both of your thoughts on kind of relates to a recent primary that was on the same ballot as yours, which was the CD1 primary, more so the process of getting on that primary ballot. So as someone who may be observing...
voting, not signatures.
That's fair, but we're going to get to voting. I have a follow-up, I promise. But so for those who are just kind of tuning into this special election cycle, there was allegations of fraud on one candidate's nomination papers. And for those watching and or listening, you need to get in Congress about 500 signatures in order to be on the ballot. And then obviously in the case of this race, it was about, I believe, 100 signatures. So after all that dialogue had happened, because those allegations of dead people being on there, people who didn't even sign it being on that candidate's nomination papers, the Secretary of State is going to submit legislation next session that would require the BOE, Board of Elections, to implement an automatic review process if a local city or town suspects fraudulence or other intentional misrepresentation on a nomination paper. So start off with you, Ms. Powell. Would you support that kind of legislation?
I would, because from the beginning, things should be kosher.
Mr. Basilian?
Absolutely.
And then there was another reform. Oh, yeah, go ahead. You can.
And one of the things I'd like to see happen with that process is there are machines that Board of Elections that can verify signatures. I mean, when you're talking about something as prideful as someone's signature, someone exercising their voice in our democracy, there's no reason why the signatures on a signature paper to qualify someone for the ballot shouldn't be sent over and verified through the same process that mail ballots and that sort of thing are. The only other thing I'd stipulate is, quite frankly, I do believe that if someone wants to run for office, and so long as they fulfill the residency requirements espoused in the state constitution, depending on where the election's happening, that they should be allowed to be on the ballot. I think this idea that someone needs to go out and get 500 signatures, all it does is probably force some undue pressure on the system where someone may resort to less scrupulous means to get on the ballot.
So if I'm hearing that right, you would even be in favor of probably getting rid of the signature requirement?
I'm in favor of getting rid of the signature requirement too, and just someone going down, filing their candidacy papers at the Board of Elections with the appropriate witness and the appropriate residence verification. And I think that, the more candidates, the better. And so long as we're also working towards a model where the person elected also has a majority of the vote.
We're right about to get to that. Just I know exactly where you're going with it, but just quickly, Ms. Powell, do you support getting rid of the signature process?
No.
Okay. And another one of those reforms, speaking of the CD1 primary, that had 12 candidates on the ballot, and even the Democratic primary in Senate District 1 had, I believe, 4 candidates. So this kind of increased the calls for ranked choice voting, where for those watching and or listening, you basically rank off your first, second, and third choice, and if a candidate doesn't get 50%, then those second and third and fourth choices get reapportioned until a candidate does get 50%, which is what we call a mandate when you have a majority of the voters. It's already being done in some places like New York City. I think Alaska's recently doing it, but it's not done here. So since it did sound like you kind of support it, so Mr. Basilian, whether it's ranked choice or any kind of reform runoffs or whatever, what would you support?
Well, so there are a lot of different proposals, right? And there's a lot of different nuances in each proposal. And so I think at the end of the day, it's important to say, when you talk about all those different nuances, that I support moving towards a system that goes from plurality to majority, first and foremost. Now, what that looks like, there are varying degrees. There's, they call it the open primary, and then if you don't get 50%, it's a head-to-head between 1 and 2.
You're talking about the jungle primary? Yep, okay.
Open primary. There's ranked choice voting, which you saw in the city of New York for mayor. But I think, if I remember correctly, in the week following that, there was a lot of confusion and complications. And at the end of the day, we live in a democracy. I do believe one person gets one vote. And I think that so much education and awareness would have to go into a system that changes that model. So in a ranked choice system where you're voting for multiple candidates, ranking them, that would need a lot of awareness around it. That said, the easiest reform seems to be changing to a top 10.
Okay, so you'd want the nonpartisan blanket primary where you have Republicans and Democrats on the same ballot, top 2 go to a runoff?
I'd be good with that.
Okay, and then Ms. Powell, whether it's ranked choice, runoffs, what would you support to make sure a winner gets a mandate?
Well, I support what is happening now with the election cycle and the process to be elected. I do not want to do a ranked choice voting. I think that just creates more disruption into the already difficult voting process, because that's what they seem to think, that it's difficult enough for us to have a few weeks of early voting, so why change the process instead of just focusing on the process that's already been made?
And one more, this may not be, I guess, a mainstream topic in terms of electoral reforms, but I do want to bring it up because a Providence rep did actually introduce it last session, which is to make those living in the country illegally have the right to vote in municipal elections. So school committee, mayor, city council. Ms. Powell, do you support or oppose that idea?
I oppose that idea.
Mr. Basilian?
What was the requirement?
So the requirement in that legislation was so long as they lived in the state for 30 days.
So the same as a residency requirement to be a qualified elector. I think at the time, at the time I would have. Right now, I would oppose that. I do support 16, 17, 18-year-olds being able to vote in their local school committee election, though, which is another reform that was proposed last year, I believe, by Senator Lawson. I think that when you talk about the decisions made at the school board level, that particularly our students in high school have an acute awareness of what's impacting them and how to enact.
So just to clarify, you oppose the living,
Yeah.
okay. And then I guess since you brought it up, 16, 17-year-olds voting in school committee, do you support or oppose that?
And you can get the last word on this.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm okay with that, because at least then they're learning the process and what their votes are going to impose on their community. At least at that point, they're learning the system of voting, and it's a great way to get them involved in other aspects of the system of voting.
And do you support runoffs or any of the other ones that we talked about?
No.
Now we're going to move on to our favorite portion of the debate, which Ryan will take over, and that is the lightning round.
I know I've kind of owned this since we started doing the debates. Thank you, Raymond. I should be able to do this from memory as well. So, candidates, just so you know, please keep the answers to maybe a sentence or so, as we're going to try to move through 6 questions very quickly. I will start with Mr. Basilian, and then we'll go in reverse order each time. So. I'm curious, first, let's start with you on what you think about the proposed payday lending legislation that was introduced last year in the Senate, and it didn't end up getting done by the end of the session.
It was passed very late. I don't believe there was an opportunity to look at it. I certainly support reducing the percent that companies can charge on loans.
Ms. Powell?
I would agree with that.
Okay, that was easy. Ms. Powell, we will start with you for the next one. And that is going to be on a proposed bill by Senator DePalma about the APRA law. It basically expands it, and a lot of journalists support it. Hopefully,
Just to clarify, that's American Public Records Act. Just
Yes,
wanna-
sorry.
It's kind of a journalism thing where if you request a document from an from like a government agency, typically you get all those redactions. Like it's basically like a whole page of like
Someone's
Sharpie.
email?
Yes, like
Yeah.
exactly like that.
Okay.
Yes.
Did you want to say anything on that before? I guess.
Yeah. No, I am for it if I'm an elected official.
So, what does that mean?
That means if I'm elected into the Senate, then yes, of course, I would want you to have access to the information that you're requesting.
And
Yep.
you did mention something about the email, so I don't know if you wanted to say anything about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think
want to make sure it's fair.
that sort of if statement is you know.
Well, I would
not
I would be
exactly
held to
walking the
that
walk.
standard.
Yeah,
I'd be
well, I
held to
would
that
say hold yourself
standard.
to that standard right now and let us know who
Well,
sent that email.
I have a copy of it in my purse if you'd like it.
Yeah.
All right, sweetheart.
Okay, well, we got to get back to the lightning round section, but there will be an
I
overlay.
would support that bill. By
Okay,
the way.
you support
I
the
think
bill.
Sunshine is nature's greatest disinfectant.
Can Raymond and I get a copy of that too? Thanks.
We already have. I have an email. I have a digital one. They'll probably put an overlay on the screen. But okay, so you support the APRA, you support the APRA bill. Okay,
Oh,
got it.
great.
Back on the track for lightning round. Fine.
All right, we're going to start with you on this one. For the school lunch program in the budget that would give free and reduced lunches to all students regardless of income. It didn't get done this year. Many were disappointed about it who were Democrats. So
Correct.
what do you think?
I support it. The Senate's passed it a number of years in a row, and I certainly imagine it'd be one of the first things that I would vote on if elected.
Ms. Powell?
Can you repeat the question, please?
It's just about if you support the program to expand free and reduced lunches to all students, which would...
I agree with it. I agree with it.
Next, we'll start with you, Ms. Powell, for this. Do you support the idea of decentralizing Kennedy Plaza, which is currently being proposed by RIPTA right now? This is, a little bit Providence specific, but you may also have to vote for it or against it in the Senate.
Yeah, so I'm not 100% on how RIPTA works because I've never really had to take RIPTA, being that I lived out of state in my younger years and came to Rhode Island when I was 18 years old. So I've always had access to a vehicle. So I've never really had to take RIPTA. But from my understanding, from what I've heard from the community, is that, it takes forever to get from point A to point B. There's a lot of turmoil when you get down to Kennedy Plaza with transit in and out of the city. I think if we look into other cities and how they've worked on their public transit sector and get some ideas on how to better efficiently utilize RIPTA through the city, then I think we should do that if RIPTA is looking to decentralize.
Mr. Basilian?
So I think what we're talking about here is moving Kennedy Plaza, correct?
Yes.
So I
Decentralized.
took RIPTA from Elmhurst to City Hall, from downtown to law school when I couldn't afford a car. I think it's important that we have a vibrant public transportation system. Let's not forget that a number of high schoolers also take RIPTA too, to and from their high school. So a lot of the discussion when you talk about moving Kennedy Plaza focuses on the individuals that spend their day there, or maybe just and when we talk about that, we're talking a lot about our unhoused population. To just move Kennedy
is rapid
Plaza,
fire,
yeah,
so just-
3 blocks doesn't really deal with the issue. I support moving Kennedy Plaza to an area where it's going to be closer to the services that those folks need access to. So we talk about moving it up by 95, by Crossroads, that sort of thing.
Okay, Mr. Basilian, next one. These next two will be a little bit easier. If you could pick one committee to be on in the Senate, what would it be, and briefly why?
Well, everyone gets, well, hopefully I'll get 2. Senate Judiciary and Special Legislation and Veterans Affairs.
Any reason?
I think having a background as a lawyer, I think I can lend a thoughtful approach to that committee, and that's where I think I'd be able to best
Mr.
work.
Powell. Ms. Powell. My goodness.
And misgender me. I think for me it would be public health and Providence Public Schools.
Okay, would those be the committees? So Education Committee and Health and Human Services Committee?
And then
Okay.
we have one more.
Yes. Ms. Powell, we'll start with you on this one for an even more fun one. If you had to bring someone to Providence, where would you take them first?
Bonus points if it's in Senate 1.
In all honesty, Mr. Lemon.
Okay,
It's a good one.
very good one. And you?
I would go to Los Andes. That's my favorite place.
I have not been to Mr. Lemon, but I have been to Los Andes.
Mr. Lemon's great too.
You have to, it's good.
Yeah.
I know.
I used to live around the corner from New England Frozen Lemonade, where you can get the pretzel stick in your frozen lemonade. So that's the way to do it.
Pelagis does the same thing. It's really good. See, if there's one thing we can all agree on, it's frozen lemonade.
We agree on a lot too. That's all right.
That's true. So, education, Ryan?
Yes, so I will take the first part of this topic, which is going to be covering public schools in the state, and specifically in Providence, of course. We all know that the state takeover has been occurring here over these last few years. COVID definitely threw a wrench in that, and now not as much progress is being made as there was the hope for. We just saw RICAS scores come out last week, and they're still not great in Providence and across the state. So, Mr. Basilian, we'll start with you on this. What role can the General Assembly have in making those Providence public schools better, and is there any specific legislation you would support to get that done?
So we're out of the lightning round, I take it?
Yeah, we're on.
Yes.
No, I think the issue in Providence public schools is probably going to be the single biggest issue that the senator from Senate District 1, or quite frankly, anyone in the General Assembly elected from Providence will deal with over the next couple of years. People ask me if I think that the state takeover has been a success. I say I don't even know where to begin on that issue, because it seems like the previous mayoral administration just lateraled the public education issue to the state. And so the state took over the system without any sort of metrics, guardrails, guidelines, guideposts in place. And so now we're kind of mired in a situation. I support ending the state takeover, increasing local accountability, restoring local accountability once again to our public schools. I know that there's a hybrid model now for an elected school board in Providence, which I think will prove interesting. I think now is an appropriate time to talk about a smooth transition back to local control. And then the state providing the necessary backstops when we talk about funding, rebuilding our schools, that sort of thing that we can do.
Just a quick follow-up. So you would support ending that state takeover, as soon as possible?
With the school year.
Okay. Ms. Powell, same question?
I would definitely support putting back Providence in charge of the school system. I think that Providence now understands what it will take to get those students into better learning environments and what it will take to get those grades up as well. I think to have it more centrally located where the people of Providence have more of a voice in that education system will be beneficial.
I'm curious, Ms. Powell, start with you on this for the RICAS scores. How much do they matter to you, and are you focused on something like that as a metric to keep up with how these schools are performing, or are you more focused on other aspects of student performance?
I'm focused on other aspects of student performance, but at the same time, the state uses the RICAS scores to kind of determine how the schools are doing. And they compare them with our neighboring states like Connecticut and Massachusetts on how our children are doing in schools as well. So I support it for right now because that's the metric that we have to go on. But initially, I think that each school should find a model that works in terms of how they determine the success of their children, because all the schools are different, because we have our public charter schools that focus on different things, more agriculture, more language. So there are different things that go into the aspects of those schools in terms of their programs.
Would you support more charter schools in Providence as a possible solution?
I support school choice.
Okay. How about you, Mr. Basilian? Same question about RICAS. RICAS and then
All right.
charter schools.
So I think, first and foremost, whenever you talk about improving education, it's got to start with empowering our teachers. We have a teaching workforce crisis, not just in Providence, but in Rhode Island. I think that lends a lot of unpredictability to a school system, and I don't think that that's fair for children. So I think when you talk about education, increasing local control at the city level, restoring local control, we also have to talk about how we're going to get people to view teaching in Providence as a sustainable and prideful career over the next 30, 40 years of their life. And I think that begins by working hand in hand with the people that are in the classroom every day. As far as RICAS goes, when you talk to administrators in Providence public schools about testing, high-stakes testing, sometimes people will call it, what does end up happening is people teach to the test. And obviously, those scores do not show a high success rate right now. But I don't think it's necessarily fair, and when you talk to administrators and people that know that test, to compare those results to kids in Massachusetts. It's a different test. It's a higher stakes test. It's a tougher test. So if you want to compare maybe across systems here in Rhode Island. That's fair, but I don't think it's fair to judge Rhode Island performance on that test to Massachusetts performance. You have to understand that they're different tests.
Speaking of Massachusetts, one thing that, to my knowledge, that they do is they have the constitutional amendment that guarantees the adequate public education. So would you support that?
Absolutely. The Senate's passed it a number of years in a row. It's been championed by Senator Roger Baccari. Before that, Senator Harold Metz, who was an educator in Providence schools for more than 30 years. It is absolutely fundamental to the success of children in the state of Rhode Island that they have a constitutional right to an education.
Ms. Powell?
Of course, 100%. I would agree with that.
I will ask a last quick question, which segues nicely into our next topic, about the pilot agreement for higher education. As the mayor just proposed something a month ago, it's I believe a 20-year deal.
Yep.
To make the colleges pay some money to the city in lieu of taxes. So I'm curious. We'll start with you, Mr. Basilian. Do you support that?
The pilot agreement that was recently
The current agreement I support. I was proud to sit across the negotiating table from our meds and eds back in 2011 when Mayor Taveras and Council President Mike Solomon got the original 10-year agreement on the books. It does make sizable advancements as it relates to that. I think there's always room for growth, and I also think we need to. It's not fair to our institutions of higher learning to kind of group them all together. Providence College has a very different model for development, say Brown University does, where they're in two different zip codes, so to speak. And I think there's a lot of valuable property that gets gobbled up on the east side and taken off the tax rolls.
Ms. Powell?
I would agree with what you just said, because at the end of the day, we have different schools with different equity to the community, and it should have been done separately and not grouped together.
So just so I have it correctly, one different agreement for each college?
I think that there should have been a different agreement per college. It shouldn't have been lumped in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the current agreement it makes advances over the previous 10 years, and it was supported, should be supported. But I do think to loop Providence College or Johnson & Wales, who's struggled financially, with their national model in recent years, alongside Brown University is. Maybe that's a different approach we can take moving forward.
Just a quick follow-up on that. For both of you, do you think that Brown should be paying more than the other institutions?
Brown does pay more than the other institutions. I just was merely talking about their business model being somewhat different, and they have a lot more property that one could deem non-institutional use.
And another aspect of this conversation, because we're doing really good on time, so I'm going to kind of stretch this one out a little bit. So there's those who are very vocal that these private colleges should pay taxes. I mean, I get it's a whole complicated conversation, especially with Brown, because they have a charter that dates to before the founding of this country, and then obviously federal law has to get changed because nonprofits don't have to pay taxes. But basically what I've heard from these people that are so adamant that Brown, PC, RISD, JWU, even Lifespan and all them pay taxes, is that they say that the state can pass a bill about this. I'm not sure if that's changed since the pilot agreement. At least from when my councilman told me that live in Providence, he said the state could still pass a bill. So I guess we'll start with you, Ms. Powell. Do you think these colleges should pay taxes instead of signing a 20-year agreement to pay like X amount of dollars?
Well, I think the pilot program is a good start. But I also think that utilizing the skills that these students have in the community, especially in the much needed underprivileged communities, would be another way to utilize that as well. So getting them involved more in like the Department of Labor and Training to help teach kids, especially our bilingual students. Like we could utilize their skills in helping in the Providence school systems and developing programs that actually work with the students who are there. So kind of encouraging more of a community aspect from these schools and community engagement would help them, and they could get credit towards their degree by doing that as well. So then it's not necessarily a financial investment, but rather a time investment in the community they're serving.
But kind of tying it back to the overall question, though, because it sounds like there's more of an emphasis on partnerships and a little bit of hesitancy on seeing taxation. So in terms of taxing them, would you support or oppose that?
I would support a tax, but obviously you would have to work all of that out. I can't say what percentage or anything like that, but I would support a tax.
Got it. And Mr. Basilian, tying you into this?
So I would just say that at the end of last session, the state legislature actually dealt with one component of the tax issue, and they passed legislation that allows these tax-exempt entities to pass on a tax bill for non-institutional use properties. So we often hear about the example of Starbucks renting a space in a Johnson & Wales building. So that sort of taxation will begin occurring, which I think is an important step forward. I think Nyoka is absolutely right that we need to take a holistic approach to what these institutions do for our population here in Providence, and not just our colleges, but also our hospitals in terms of uncompensated care, that sort of thing. We talk about Providence College, whether it's their involvement in Catholic schools or underprivileged schools. We can talk about Johnson & Wales and them being involved at career and tech programs throughout our state in terms of the culinary programs. There's a lot of good that happens, and I do think, if my memory serves me correct, the pilot agreement, not that it codifies some of that donated services, but it certainly allows a university to provide a number attached to that, to not necessarily for remuneration, but just to demonstrate that they are giving back to our community in a very real way. And on this fact, because sometimes people want to demonize in a very adversarial way our colleges and universities here in the city of Providence, and I'm grateful that that discussion isn't playing out, because all you have to do is walk around the streets of Providence during the summer versus the school year to understand how much the students here do drive our economy, whether it's our small businesses in our neighborhoods or also our restaurants downtown.
How do you feel about Lifespan either signing a pilot or being taxed?
I think Lifespan should be taxed as it relates to that non-institutional use theory, because I think a core component of their business model is to lease office space to other medical practices. I would just say that there is a lot of uncompensated care that Lifespan provides to our community. One thing that I think is critical, and it will play out over probably the next decade or so, is that you do see the heads, whether it's our institutions of learning or our hospitals, there's a real chasm between the workforce and what they're paid and what they earn in compensation.
Kind of pinning it down, though, in terms of either having Lifespan on a pilot agreement or having them subject to taxation, where do you stand?
Oh, I would say a pilot agreement. That or a highly discounted tax rate, property tax rate.
And Ms. Powell, you come from the medical world, being a nurse, so where do you stand on Lifespan's role in this conversation?
Well, Lifespan has been a pinnacle of care in Providence and the state, especially with their trauma programs and such. I think that, just like Jake said, it has to be a tiered type of taxation as opposed to just saying, we're going to keep them in the pilot program. I think that, like you said, there's a lot of different office arrangements. Same thing with Care New England. I mean, Brown University does a lot of things with Care New England. I know just at Butler alone, there are many offices there and programs that are within the hospital itself that are Brown affiliate and Brown run programs. So
I would just add to this discussion too, because we're talking about making them pay more. There's a whole other side to that flip coin in terms of the dollars that they take in. And one of the, our hospital system in the state of Rhode Island is in crisis, and I'm sure Nyoka would be able to testify. Yeah, exactly. But one of the things that drives that is that our reimbursement rates here have not kept pace with our neighbors. Right. So just by way of example, at Women and Infants, a birth gets reimbursed like $5,000, when across the border a hospital gets reimbursed $12,000 on that. So think about how that trickles down the system. I think it's important because it can be destabilizing to the biggest segment of our workforce here in Rhode Island.
I guess while we're still on this conversation, because it kind of relates, semi-recently, if I have this correct, LaSalle, the Senate, the GA passed a bill so that they were now tax exempt. So if you wanted to talk about LaSalle's role, do you think they should pay taxes?
That was what, 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
I believe it was like 2 sessions ago.
So, and I think it's important in this discussion to note that LaSalle Academy was always tax exempt. What happened was, I believe, some property from the diocese was transferred to LaSalle Academy. That property had always been tax exempt too. So really, it was just the merging of those properties under the LaSalle umbrella, should it all still remain tax exempt. And I believe the House passed that. I believe it's now law.
Yeah, it is law.
And all that law, all that property had been previously tax exempt before.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I had that clarified, because I remember that was a tough discussion a couple sessions ago. Again,
that discussion, I think, was driven by folks that want to be adversarial with these particular institutions. I don't think that's the right approach. I think LaSalle Academy isn't going anywhere. At least I hope it isn't, because when I go to LaSalle Bakery right across the street, you see 100 LaSalle Academy kids in there sustaining that small business. You can go to the other businesses that are along that thoroughfare and see the same thing, them using it. So, and I think that also, not to discount the great education that they provide to kids throughout our state.
I think, now we were doing really good on time, so I kind of wanted to make this one a little bit of a
If we have
prolonged
an extra
topic.
time, I have a bonus question for
Yeah, exactly. I think we should be good with this last topic. So speaking of higher ed, transitioning now to where we're taping this. We're currently taping this at Rhode Island College, where I currently attend, and thankfully Anchor TV has decided to help produce and make this debate happen. So one Rick Center topic I want to get both of your thoughts on is the Hope Scholarship. It's now in effect. It will be funded as a pilot program for the next few years. We recently had a big ceremonial signing by the governor right at the quad, and the Rick community was out in full force. So starting with you, Ms. Powell, how do you feel about the Hope Scholarship?
And just so people know, the Hope Scholarship would give people 2 years free at Rick. I believe it's their last 2 years.
Yep.
They just have to be in good academic standing
and enroll as
be
a
Rhode
freshman.
Island be a Rhode Island resident.
Not a restaurant. So yeah, how do you feel about the Hope Scholarship?
I think it's great. I think that it's great to have a scholarship program that encourages people to finish college. I myself had to stop in the middle of college here at Rick because I was paying for school myself. So freshman and sophomore year, freshman year was a scholarship that I received from Connecticut, and I was able to go pretty much free for the first year. Second year, I was hit with a $25,000 bill. And so I had to work while I was in school. And then I had to take time off the next semester to make more money, live off campus, that whole thing, and try to get myself back into it. So I completely understand the aspect of being able to have a scholarship that helps you finish your degree once you start it. I think that the grade point average requirement is a little low, but other than that, I think it's promising.
So currently for those watching and or listening, it's a 2.5 requirement for the GPA. What would you suggest it go up to?
At least a 3.
3? Okay. Mr. Basilian, how do you feel about the Hope Scholarship program? And if you want to even talk about the GPA?
Yeah, no, so when I take a step back, and I've had the opportunity to do this, I guess, as you're running for office, you think about what in your life has brought you these different things. I came to Providence when I was 18 to go to Providence College. And now looking back, I've lived in the area ever since then. And when I think back over my time, whether it was at PC or at law school, like my biggest regret in my life is that I was constantly juggling jobs and education. And a lot of times, sometimes your education suffers as a result, whether it's delivering pizzas for Golden Crust till 3 a.m. I mean, you got to get up for Civ at 8 a.m. the next day. I mean, it's such a costly endeavor that when you're forced to balance all those things, you're not getting the most out of it. So I support really a lot of different programs that make it easier for kids to go to school and reduce that cost burden. One of the things that I think we could do a better job of here in Rhode Island is taking pride in our public universities and putting them up on a pedestal. I know as a PC grad, that's a little, sacrosanct to say something like that. But I mean, URI is a tremendous research institution. We're investing over $100 million in Narragansett Bay campus that's going to unlock over $1 billion in research opportunities. Rhode Island College, the teaching college, the nursing college of our state, I think we got to get back to that foundational aspect. But we need to make it prideful and easy for Rhode Island high school graduates to go to these schools and affordable. I mean, I came from Massachusetts where there were if you got a certain grade point average at your high school, you could go to a UMass school for a very steep discount. And I think that's something we have to look at, irrespective of the final 2 years or the first 2 years as you talk about promise. I think you need that robust understanding of higher education and reducing the cost burden so that kids can go to school and finish.
So back to Ms. Powell's point, is the 2.5 GPA too low for this program?
Yes.
Okay.
No, it's not too low. To be honest, I don't even think you should have a grade point average. I think if you should want kids to finish school in 4 years, get out, and become contributing members to our workforce.
So if it were up to you, you'd slash the GPA requirement?
If it was up to me, if you graduated from a Rhode Island high school and you were still a resident of Rhode Island, you would be able to go to one of our public universities for a steeply discounted rate, borderline free, and you could pay room and board if you wanted to live on campus. We're in a very small state.
And this one's kind of looking ahead, although it probably won't happen politically now because the Hope Scholarship is in for the next couple of years, this pilot program. But one thing to look ahead to, so would you ever support maybe expanding the Rhode Island Promise, or Rick, or maybe making all 4 years tuition free? It kind of sounds like you're
Yes, because I think what you have to think about when you take a step back is that's an investment, not just in those by discounting that, so to speak. We should be talking about not a 4-year investment, but a 40-year investment. So when that person leaves, they stay here, there's robust jobs in our economy for them to work in, and they become a contributing member of society. I think all too often, sometimes here in Rhode Island, whether it's parochial or myopic, we take this approach where, oh my gosh, that's $7,000 a kid for a year. Well, at the end of the day, if they can get out and be making $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year and contributing back to our economy for 40 years of our life, that's sustainable
So you
growth.
favor it?
Yes, absolutely.
And Ms. Powell? Either expanding the promise to Rick or making all 4 years free?
I think that some kids, when they go off to college, will decide whether or not they want to stay in college. I think we should also focus on that aspect as well, where they're in that stage of their lives where they're trying to figure out which route they want to take. They just left high school. Should they have taken off a gap year? Should they really go and invest in going off to college? So I think to make it free for the 4 years is kind of intense, because you're now saying that they have no liabilities
So you oppose it?
in regards to that. So I would oppose it, because if they want to try out the college experience, CCRI is available for that.
Okay, and I have one more Rick-centric question, and then we're going to go to 60-second closing statements. So one topic, this not really scholarship or tuition related, but a Rick-centric topic. It comes up every so often and has been introduced in the House the past couple of sessions by Rep. Bill O'Brien, I believe, and that is arming Rick and CCRI's campus police. Currently, they are not armed, but URI, Rhode Island's other public college does this. So, and Rick hasn't really supported it. They cite costs for training officers, and students have also shown their concerns too when this has been brought up into the mainstream on campus in the past. So, starting with you, Mr. Brasilian, where do you stand on arming Rick and CCRI's campus police?
Do you want us to come back to you?
No, I'm just saying. So I went to PC where it was my informed experience. I don't believe that they carried guns. Obviously, that was, campus shootings, all that have only grown in number of incidents and grown in the sense of tragedy. I mean, when I was a sophomore, I guess Virginia Tech happened, and that seems to be, what I'm tethered to in my mind. But it seems like every year there's more and more tragedy. If it's shown as a proven and safe way to reduce the kind of mass harm that occur on campus, and the administration would support it, then I think I would support it.
To it.
I'm open to it.
Okay.
The most important thing is training, and that the administration supports.
So with the contingency that Rick is on board with the idea, Rick and CCRI are on
If
board.
they think it's the best way to provide a safe atmosphere for their students, then I would support it, yes.
Ms. Powell?
I would agree, because I think that campus police should be, even if they're retired, still maintain their credibility and their credentials to be a carrying member in the event that the event calls for it. Because when I was an RA on campus, I definitely had a couple of situations where campus police had to be involved. And I think that in that situation, the student would have felt a little bit safer if campus police was armed at that point.
So you'd support it?
So I would support it.
Got it. I think that's all the time we have for the debate portion. Now Ryan's going to moderate our 60-second closing statements.
Okay, I just have one quick question before. This is just very timely. It popped into my head this morning. Reading Political Scene for the Providence Journal about some legislators on their bios on the website apparently having some discrepancies with their levels of education, including a Republican, Mike Chippendale, and two senators who are Democrats, John Burke being one of them, and Josh Miller. So, with this, and of course it relates to education, I was just going to ask both of you, starting with Mr. Baccari, if you would like to share your level of education. I guess there was some confusion about if people completed college or not. So, if you would just like to...
I mean, we can do that now, or I can do it as part of my closing statement.
Okay.
I'm happy to do whatever.
Yeah, do it now.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I graduated from Providence College in 2009, majoring in political science and minoring in finance. 2010, I stuck around and got my MBA from Providence College. And then I went to work for the city of Providence for 3 years as chief of staff of the city council, and I went to law school at Roger Williams University.
Great. Ms. Powell?
Cool. I finished RIC 2014, and then I finished CCRI in 2020.
Great. So now no one has to go and read your bios on the website. We don't have to worry about that. I will start with Ms. Powell for closing statements. You have 60 seconds, please.
My name is Naoka Powell. I'm running for Senate District 1 in the special election. A vote for me would put the, oh gosh, a little nervous. I don't like talking about myself. A vote for me would mean that we are focusing on our families first, on our students, on our children, and our cost of living. It would mean that we would be able to function as a well-rounded society with the ability to pay for the things that we need in order to keep our families afloat in inflationary times. It would also help us when it comes to higher education, better services availability, especially in healthcare, which is so needed at this time, and public safety. Vote Naoka Powell.
Thank you. Mr. Basilian, your 60 seconds closing statement.
My name is Jacob Bazillion. I'm the Democratic nominee for State Senate District 1. I think it's important to always note that this is a special election because of the passing of Senator Mary Ellen Goodwin, who served the district for more than 3 decades in the state Senate. I came to Providence 18 years ago. I'm 36 years old, so half my life go to Providence College. Ever since then, I've been involved in my community, and I think over the last couple of years, we've seen the needs intensify as it relates to our capital city, particularly Smith Hill, Elmhurst, and the North End. And when I say that our needs are intensifying, they center on our most basic human needs as well: housing, public safety, public education. It's going to take a lot of work to get a handle on those and address those issues, but I believe with my experience first serving as Chief of Staff to the Providence City Council and then as Chief of Staff to the State Senate, I am uniquely qualified to fill out the remainder of this term and hopefully serve the district for as long as the voters will have me. So just ask you to vote Jake Bazillion in a couple of weeks.
Thank you to both of you, and I'll hand it back over to Raymond for the outro.
And that's all the time we have for this debate. Can you believe 1 hour went by very quickly? Mr. Basilian and Ms. Powell, thank you both for giving us your time for this debate. Ryan, thank you for coming, and Rick, to co-moderate this debate with me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, anytime. And hopefully in a year's time, you'll be back in this chair as a Rick student moderating the local 2024 debates. And thank you to all of you at home for watching this debate and or listening to it if you're tuning in via podcast. Election day for this race is on Tuesday, November 7th. Early voting is underway, which will go until Monday the 6th at 4 p.m. To learn more about how you can vote, where you can vote if you're in this district, if you live in this district, and what you need in the event that you're going to vote in person, visit vote.sos.ri.gov. Again, that is vote.sos.ri.gov. For Ryan Lukowicz, I'm Raymond Baccari. Have a great evening.